Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to The Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart, the most listened to radio show in the nonprofit sector, dedicated to helping your charity succeed. It's no secret that combining online and offline techniques is the key to fundraising success, and practical nonprofit management advice is what you need. The Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart is the perfect landing point to learn from experts around the world who provide advice you can use. Ted Hart is without a doubt one of the foremost nonprofit thought leaders. Also a successful author, his books range from successful online fundraising to expert nonprofit management. Guests on the Nonprofit Coach are leaders in their field who share their insider tips and trade secrets in a conversational style both the experienced and novice will benefit from. Ted lectures around the world, but now he's here for you. From the latest in charity news, technology, fundraising, and social networking, Ted and his guests help you and your organization move to greater levels of efficiency and fundraising success. This is a live call-in show. Add your voice by calling 347-324-3080. After the show, you can find all our podcasts at tedhart.com. Click on Radio. Don't forget to dial 347-324-3080. Now, welcome the host of The Nonprofit Coach, Ted Hart.
And welcome to this latest edition of The Nonprofit Coach. Thank you so much for joining me today. As the announcer said, you can call in today at 347-324-3080. Make sure you hit the pound button so you raise your hand on the switchboard to let me know you would like to ask a question of our Page 2 expert. And today I have with me Lilya Wagner, who is going to be sharing information and insights into diversity and philanthropy. I'll share a little bit more about that with you in just a few seconds. You can also join me over in the chat room. I see a few people over in the chat room. You can ask questions there, or feel free to email me today at tedhart@tedhart.com. As always, here on the Nonprofit Coach, we start with Page 1 News. First up here on the Nonprofit Coach in the chat room here, we have our Page 1 News. Kinga Ela is here with us, and she's the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at CAF America. And apropos to our discussion about global philanthropy today, Kinga is here to share with us some important information regarding a new symposium which is going to be held next month at the United Nations. Welcome here to the Nonprofit Coach, Kinga Ela.
Thank you, Ted. Indeed, we have an exciting event coming up in June 15 and 16 in New York. It's going to take place at the United Nations headquarters, and it is the 2016 International Grant-Making Symposium. The event is presented by CAF America in a partnership with UNDP.
And in this session, you said that that's a two-day session, June 15th and 16th. What are some of the topics? Why would someone want to attend the International Grant-Making Symposium?
That's a good question, Ted. We intend this symposium to be a two-day educational training, and we expect nonprofits, family foundations, corporate foundations, and corporations who are interested in international grant-making to join us, because we're going to explore the critical role of the international grant-making in achieving the global progress towards the SDGs. And within this context, we're going to discuss very critical information to any international grant maker. We're going to discuss in detail rules and regulations around ED and ER. We're going to discuss the mechanisms for international grant-making, how to take strategic action, and we're going to also debate some of the solutions which are available for giving to challenging markets, and we're going to address anti-money laundering constraints on international grant-making, just to name a few.
Some of these speakers are really quite impressive. You have speakers from the Ford Foundation, Pixera Global, True Impact, the Global Fund for Women. CAF America is a partner, and you mentioned a moment ago the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, and CAF America is a partner in the SDG Philanthropy platform. Why is that important, and why would that draw someone to the International Grant-Making Symposium?
Well, Ted, as we know, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, were just passed in last year in September, and they entered into force at the beginning of this year. And they basically set the platform for the next 15 years of the world's common goals. Of course, philanthropy as a sector is going to be a very important participant in working towards achieving these goals. So with international grant making at the base of any philanthropic action, we thought that this year's International Grant Making Symposium should address these questions within the context of the SDGs. So we're looking forward to diving into this topic from the context of the SDGs.
This is a very impressive and timely symposium. How can my listeners register for the International Grant Making Symposium if they would like to attend?
Of course. Registering is very simple. You just go to cafamerica.org. Under programs, we have our IGS page. The link for that is cafamerica.org/IGS, and you'll find the register button right there on the top of the page.
And I see that there's also information about the IGS, including the schedule at a glance, so lots of information available online. Kinga Ila is joining us from CAF America as the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives. Thank you for joining us here on the Nonprofit Coach.
Of course, thank you.
So as Kinga mentioned, I do want to just draw attention to the website CAF America, that's CAF as in Frank, America.org/IGS, which stands for International Grant Making Symposium. Next up here on the Nonprofit Coach is our Page 2 expert. Lilya Wagner is the Director of Philanthropic Services for Institutions, a trainer for the Fundraising School, as well as on Philanthropic Studies faculty of the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. And she also teaches in the graduate program at St. Mary's University in Minnesota. Her published books, including Careers in Fundraising, which was the winner of the Skystone Ryan Research Prize presented by the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and Leading Up, the Transformational Leadership for Fundraisers. She's also had several books published in other areas of interest, including the topic of our session here today, which is a terrific new book entitled Diversity and Philanthropy, Expanding the Circle of Giving. And a real thrill for me, which I don't often get, is that Lilly is actually here in the studio with me. So we get a chance to not only chat today, but see each other, talk with each other. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, and welcome here to the Nonprofit Coach, Lilya Wagner.
Thank you, Ted. It's a real privilege to be here with you.
You have an extensive background in international fundraising and in cultural diversity. Where does that come from? How does that stem to your expertise?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because one might say that I was born into this topic. I was born in Estonia, and fortunately a lot of people in America finally know what Estonia is, because just on the way here I was reading that Estonia is the leading country for technology. And of course no session can go by without me stating that we invented Skype. I think we sold it to an American company.
I think it's sold a few times, but still a great product.
And so I was born in Estonia, the various cultures in my background, but I was a refugee child, homeless in Germany, trying to flee communism. finally got to America. Wasn't here very long. And then my family was sent to South America, so I grew up among Spanish-speaking people, both here and in the bad part of Brooklyn, New York, until I went to college in Massachusetts. So very early on, I was subjected to, very nicely, to several kinds of influences. One, of course, was the various cultural aspects, but along with that was also the matter of generosity. Even though I was just a tiny kid when we were refugees, I still remember the generosity of people. Strangers, giving to strangers. And then, of course, living among Spanish-speaking people for quite a while, seeing some of the traditions of generosity, the giving spirit. So in response to your question, this was something that I literally did grow up with, and the more I got into the fundraising profession, and the more I had the conviction that philanthropy really is a matter of inclusivity, when we don't take into account these factors that are the impulses for our generosity, whatever we want to call philanthropy in other cultures, we're missing the boat, really. Mm-hmm. And we are not giving people the chance to be part of something bigger than they are themselves. Mm-hmm. So thank you for asking that, because it is an exciting part of my background.
Well, I think it's important, and certainly serving as the CEO here at CAF America Donor Advised Funds, our expertise is in international. And I think one of the themes that I got from reading your book is that all philanthropists don't look like you and me. Philanthropists come from all over the world, and they bring their own cultural interests to their philanthropy. You open up your book with an interesting statement that I wondered if you would respond to and sort of expand upon. Individuals and cultures, you say, may have varying motives and methods of giving. However, they share a belief in using their resources and skills to benefit the public good. Is benefiting the public good, is giving universal? Is it a human trait?
I believe it is, because as I've interacted, thanks largely in part to my long-time association with the School of Philanthropy and being sent globally, but also a lot of the other aspects of my work, as I observe people starting with the people in the Andes when I was growing up, but also people in Kenya. One of my early stints in working overseas was in Israel, another was in Kiev in Ukraine, was in New Zealand and Australia several times, and as I observed this motivation, one of the reasons that people give in the United States, when we track through research, why do people give, is to make a difference. And I found it very interesting, no matter where I've taught or for whatever group, when we go through the exercise of why do people give, why don't they give, why don't they like to ask, one of the leading motivations is to make a difference.
To make a difference.
And it cuts across many cultures. How it exhibits itself is very different, but that motivation, I find from my experience and also many researchers, it's quite universal.
Quite universal, and what's really terrific about this book, Diversity and Philanthropy, and we're going to, throughout this show, we're going to be able to look at those various cultures and learn a little bit about what makes them unique, what makes their philanthropy focused on the culture that they come from, and why is that important for our audience to understand that as fundraisers, as nonprofit managers in a global world, it's important to understand that everyone doesn't look just like you, but they bring their own richness to the discussion. I think throughout the session I'm going to quote you because you're always so brilliant in what you say.
Thank you.
In your book here, you also make note of a very noted philanthropist, and that's Mario Marino, chairman of Venture Philanthropy Partners, a philanthropic fund here in Washington, D.C. And he said something that I think you found to be important enough to put in your book anyway, that he says the new generation of philanthropists see themselves as citizens of the world. That says to me that just giving to one culture, just giving within your own country is a bit of a notion of the past, and that having empathy and seeing need around the globe is becoming as natural as supporting your local soup kitchen or your local house of worship. Do you see that? Is that an important trend that my listeners should be aware of?
I think there are a couple of angles to that particular point. One is that I began to see, because I was a college and university professor at one time, and I began to see in the early 90s how young people began to be more interested in their communities and making a difference. And of course, with the advent of the Internet, when I say advent, I don't mean the very beginning, but when it became available to the public, that certainly caused our young people, from the time they were little, to understand the global aspects of what was going on. And I know in the early days, sometimes my organizations would lose donations, my American organizations would lose donations, because people wanted to give to the emerging countries from the Soviet Union era. I know that was part of my giving, being able to go back and give to my country. But then certainly the growth of technology, and I remember when I was working for an international development organization right here in Washington, there was a school or a couple of schools in Chicago that had sister schools in Jordan. And of course all of that was facilitated by the growing awareness on the part of our young people that it really is, to use an old cliche, a global village. But I think it's been beneficial from both sides, from the young people today, and these young people mature very quickly and they take those attitudes with them, but also our partner countries. And also realizing that generosity, like we already said, exists there too. So another angle to this is also the giving across borders. The Chronicle of Philanthropy has been very good in documenting and covering some of those points, where donors in India might prefer to give to some of the Washington, D.C. organizations, and vice versa. One of my possible donors in Nebraska chose to give to Russia. So thanks, of course, this is your area of expertise, but the social media, I believe, really has fostered the growth of philanthropy, and we need to keep up with an awareness of these cultures so that we can include people more as givers, as donors, not just recipients, as we sometimes perceive them.
Right. One of the concepts that we discuss often here on the Nonprofit Coach is one that I've sort of promoted, which is the notion of what I call you philanthropy, which is me philanthropy, my philanthropy. And that I envision a future, and I think we're seeing the trends right now, where philanthropists are far less interested in brand name charities or giving to sort of big box charities, but they want to have impact. They want to make sure that their money is being used for very specific purposes. And I think the Internet does give them the ability to look across borders and to say, you know, I not only want to, but I know that I can make a difference in this community. And that's been part of the success of CAF America, is that we've grown 55% in the last year and 143% in the last 4 years. And part of that is this trend of donors coming to us and saying, you know, I want to give on the ground in Uganda. I want to give, you know, a very specific gift in the Philippines. And I want to support that charity in the Philippines. And what CAF America does is there's obviously a lot of regulations if you want to also earn a tax deduction for moving money internationally, and that's entirely possible. It's the work that CAF America does. We had Kinga Ila on earlier, and she mentioned the International Grant-Making Symposium. Part of that is going to be a tutorial on equivalency determination and expense responsibility, which are the two protocols the IRS has provided us that allow for a tax deduction to be made and support charities anywhere in the world. It's complicated, but not impossible. And I think the concept that you've brought up here of global citizens and people who have the empathy and the desire and the ability to support across borders need a framework to do that, and that's part of what CAF America can provide. In your book, you go on to mention the importance of giving in various cultures. We're going to take a very quick break here. When we come back, I want to start talking specifically about some of the cultures that you've outlined in your book, and we'll be right back.
Every day, millions of people are online, many of whom want to help, volunteer, and donate to a good cause. Nonprofit organizations can use many Google tools to reach potential donors around the world and raise more money. And as an approved nonprofit, it doesn't cost a thing. It's all free. Google Grants helps you promote your website with free advertising on Google.com through the AdWords program. With Google AdWords, you create ads and choose words or phrases related to your nonprofit organization. When people search on Google using one of your phrases, your ad will appear next to the Google search results under the Sponsored Links section. AdWords allows you to target certain geographic areas, dates, and times of day for your ads to appear. YouTube for Nonprofits is another tool that can boost donations to your organization. The program offers a number of perks that get your message out there and drive viewers to take action and donate. You can list your organization on YouTube's nonprofit channel and add call-to-action overlays on your videos to drive viewers to donate. Need help analyzing your website traffic and marketing effectiveness? Google Analytics is a free tool that will give you rich insight and help you increase the number of people that visit and donate to your site. Google Analytics can be invaluable to many people in your organization, such as development directors, marketing staff, and your web team. There are many other tools that can help you reach more donors and raise funds, like Google Checkout, where you can process credit card donations with no transaction fee, Google Sites to create a free website, and Website Optimizer, where you can figure out the best landing pages to turn site visitors into donors. To get started, apply for Google for Nonprofits today.
Remember, our podcasts and archives are always available 24 hours a day at tedhart.com. Click on Radio Links. If you're listening live today, the phone lines are open. Call in and ask a question by dialing 347-324-3080. Now, back to the Nonprofit Coach with Ted Hart.
And I've always found it helpful to have the microphone on when I share updates about my schedule. So I'm going to share with you that next Tuesday here on the Nonprofit Coach, we will have Judge Snyderman, who is the president of Tapped Mobile, as our guest here on the Nonprofit Coach. We are now back here live with Lilya Wagner. And Lilya, before we get into some of the insights that you have into some of the various cultures, sort of across the board here are the notions of accountability and outcomes. How does that factor into not only this terrific book, but your notion of where philanthropy is today?
Well, two of the most critical factors in fundraising today is that people prefer to give to outcomes, not just because we have a need. They want to know what happens with their money. And that, of course, leads into the second factor, which is so important, and that's the accountability. Now, this is not the time or place to go into all the reasons why we demand accountability, but it certainly is why people have always wanted to know what happens with their money. It's more important today than ever. Now, this is what's interesting, too, is that with the dawn of our global world, with the Internet and all our social media, that both of these are in greater demand, but also easier to fulfill if we're inclined to do so as responsible fundraisers and nonprofits. And it also puts together two of the factors that I talk about in this book. And one is our roots, and how do those roots still continue in one way or another to shape what we currently do with philanthropy. across and within cultures. And that, I think, is one of the wonderful things about America, which is my adopted country. And having had the privilege of, when I came over here, we were poor as church mice, which fits because my father was a pastor. And it was really through the generosity of Americans that I experienced some of this early philanthropy, so to speak. So I think a combination of roots and what's currently happening is valuable for both the practitioner, but also an enriching part of our United States and Canada. This book covers much territory, isn't just the United States.
Sure does. You cover the entire globe. So I want to first of all encourage folks to find Diversity and Philanthropy by Dr. Lilya Wagner. You can find that on Amazon. You should have a copy of this in your library. Now, Lilya, I'm going to just highlight some of the things that I've read so we can try to cover as many of the cultures as possible. We only have 30 minutes left. These shows always go far too fast. I'm going to pull something out and ask you to respond to it, but I want to give you permission to go a little bit deeper or to go wherever you'd like to in each of the cultures, but I'm going to pull you back and get into the next culture so we can try to cover as many of these as we can. In your book, you start off the first area of the world, or the first culture that you speak of is that of the Hispanic culture. And you make note of, as it says here, remittances, or the act of giving back to the country of origin, is a major way of giving in the Hispanic culture. Can you tell us what are remittances and why is the Hispanic culture focused on that form of giving?
Remittances are giving back to your country of origin. And while many populations do that, from my research and the experts that I've included, the many number of experts, that appears to be a very comfortable way for Hispanics to give back to their families, to their own country. And remittances really is this act of sending some of your money from the United States or Canada back to your country of origin. If many of your relatives are here, and many of the other cultures see family as a much wider circle. I know when I did work with refugees in the refugee camps of Thailand, this matter of fictive kin, the extended family, as people were brought after the Cambodian Holocaust to the United States, that was a very good example of the extended family that many cultures have.
And hang on to.
And Hispanics in particular have that loyalty, and therefore the generosity is expressed in remittances. And we don't always count that as philanthropy, but it's generosity.
It's generosity, exactly. And I wanted to draw a distinction there. It's not tax-deductible philanthropy. It doesn't fit within an IRS code definition of philanthropy, but nonetheless is giving. And is giving of your resources to help others. So it certainly fits the topic of your conversation. Let's move on to, if we can, something else on history.
Can I interject something before we go into more of these cultures? What I have done in this book is pull together every possible resource that I could find. And, of course, having spoken about the Internet, that helped. And also, like in the UK, there were some very significant books being written, for example, Teresa Lloyd. And what I have done is pulled together our best knowledge, our best research, best practice, and put that into chapters so that we can see what are the main characteristics. Now, I'd like to equate that with personality tests. And many of your listeners, no doubt, have done either the Myers-Briggs or the DISC type, which are the two most credible. Now, I happen to be very much an ENTJ, but when you read the description of an ENTJ, I don't always fit. Well, I think people should read this book with that in mind. We're picking out the best knowledge we have about generosity in a particular culture or even sometimes subculture. And somebody might read this and say, well, I know somebody who doesn't fit this. That's fine. We're looking at the best characteristics that this is based in good research and experience.
Yeah.
So wanted to give that caveat.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I certainly read your book with that in mind. I think that others should read this book with that in mind, that this is sort of the macro view of each of the various cultures. And it's a great place to start if you're trying to learn about a culture, but understanding the specific philanthropists that you're talking to and the specific communities that you're interacting with would be a wise way to approach that. So this is a starting point, but not necessarily the ending point.
Like prospect research, early in my time, well, not so early, but I was the head of the Women's Philanthropy Institute at Indiana University. And we can't look at all women givers and say they all will do this, they all will do that. But certain characteristics emerge, and that gives us a basis on which to build for more specificity in groups. Then we go to the individual donors, and that's, I think, one of the values of the book.
I certainly feel that it's one of the values. Let's move on to the African culture, and the church has been a major focus of African American philanthropy, both as a recipient of generosity and as a conduit to other organizations such as those who feed the hungry and care for the homeless. That certainly sounds like a different avenue of philanthropy. So talk to us a little bit about African philanthropy.
I think some of the richness of African American philanthropy can't be appreciated until we look at some specific countries on the continent of Africa. Some of the factors that they share across borders of this country, and unfortunately, many people talk about Africa as a country.
As if it were a country, exactly.
And yet
it's a very diverse continent.
50-plus countries, I believe. And some of the factors that cross borders and came to America, we saw exhibited in sometimes unrecorded ways, but even during the days of slavery, helping each other, the matter of many different cultures being lumped together perhaps on a plantation, that sharing across country borders even took place way back then. Now, the church is very important in the giving of the African American culture, as well as causes that build up the race, as is noted in the book. However, church also, I should note, has had a major factor, for example, in Latin American culture, where giving to the Catholic Church, which was virtually a mandate, also morphed into the privilege of being generous, because, giving is developing a habit of giving, a habit of generosity.
And it's very much embedded in these cultures. It is part of the culture itself. Keeping eye on the time and wanting to cover all of your topics here, which is part of my job, is moving on to Asians and Pacific Islanders in North America and abroad. And I'm sure that there's a lot for you to share here, but there was something that was in this chapter that I found absolutely fascinating and was not duplicated in the other chapters, and that is high net worth Asian philanthropists gave 12% of their wealth, highest in the world. What is unique about the Asian culture that makes it so philanthropic, and is it across the culture, or is it as you gain wealth, you're more philanthropic?
I think this is a good time to interject very quickly that when we look at cultures broadly, we can never forget that our individual donor groups or our donors, that we go to one more layer. If this is a Mexican group, what are some of the roots? What are some of the habits? Same thing with Asian cultures. When we're trying to compare Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Pacific Islanders, just to name four very quickly.
Very different cultures.
Very different cultures. And I don't know whether it is economic progress or certain factors in the particular country that have developed maybe an ability to give more. Now, we also should interject that we know from research that people in the lowest third of the economic strata pretty much across the world are also giving. I've seen some great generosity from those who are in what we would call the low economic strata. Mm-hmm. So it stands to reason that countries that have been very progressive, perhaps not so much political strife, are naturally going to have more resources, but also being able to focus more on the generosity factor. Mm-hmm. I know when I've done work several times training, especially in Japan, there are some roots there that go way back, but they also have seen prosperity, and these all work together mm-hmm. as pieces of a puzzle, really. Mm-hmm. And when you look at some of the strife in countries of Africa, my brother lived in Africa for 22 years, and seeing the change going from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, that was a little disruptive. Now we're seeing people's generosity. I recently did training in Zimbabwe, mm-hmm. and we're seeing that emerge, but in a more culturally appropriate mm-hmm. rather than an imposed culture.
Imposing another culture.
Yeah, it had its good parts, right. Of course. But I think that's could be one of the answers to what you just asked.
There's something that I've certainly heard, and you bring up in your chapter, Nina Agrawal in an article in Advancing Philanthropy raised sort of a misconception, I gather, that even though Asians make up a small percentage of the U.S. population, why is it important to cultivate them as donors when one of the sort of, I don't know, common themes that people may feel about Asians is that Asians, and this is quoting this article, not quoting you, quoting this article in Advancing Philanthropy, Asians overwhelmingly give just to their families. Why even bother approaching them for unrelated causes? And she points out in this article it's a misconception that needs to be overturned and needs to be rethought. What can we learn in your chapter, and what have you learned about Asian cultures that say that is a misconception and needs to be overturned?
One of my friends, Japanese American, pointed out to me that while it is universally true, and we can find a number of these characteristics that we could actually say, well, that's in that culture, that's in that one, but what we're looking for is where is it more important in this culture than maybe in this culture. And one of the factors that she brought up was that serve before you ask. And sometimes, unwittingly, our organizations, our nonprofits, and you're a nonprofit coach, you know this,
right.
We sometimes don't think about providing the service, which is why this book is also written for leaders, not just fundraisers.
Right.
And one of the big points that she said is business as usual. We need to remember which cultures need more customizing, more respect for their differences than others. Let's back up just quickly to the Hispanic culture. I remember going up to one person who was in a class of mine whose name was Martinez, and I spoke to him in Spanish because I thought it would be fun. He said, laugh, and he said, I don't speak Spanish. But in the Asian cultures, perhaps sticking more to the roots of what has shaped their giving and this family concept, as I mentioned, Cambodians in the Thai refugee camps,
right.
is perhaps more of a factor. So if we haven't included them on boards, which is a perennial topic,
right.
in our service areas, perhaps going into the community, getting leadership involved, this is true also of the Hispanic culture, they're not as likely to give to what we very loosely term mainstream. That, of course, brings up a whole different factor,
sure.
our
terminology.
But
that's across the board, right? I mean, if your organization only caters to majority whites, if your board is majority whites, if your staff is majority whites, why are you coming and asking me for money only because I have money, but you haven't shown that you actually have an interest in my community and the things that matter to me? And I can imagine that is a common theme. Continuing to move along here, absolutely fascinating. I mean, certainly it's a topic for our days here, but I found it fascinating that you wrote about Arab American philanthropy It's characterized largely by an informal approach where giving is often based on emotion, not on financial, tax, or estate planning. Gifts go primarily to family or directly to others in need, to churches or mosques, or in the form of remittances. So this sort of, is this, and I don't think you necessarily made this case, but I'm almost wondering, is this meant to read that the Arab culture prefers to sort of be anti-mainstream, and that they purposely want to not necessarily be giving to big box charities and giving in what might be considered sort of Anglo-Western ways, but that they have their own form of philanthropy, and that understanding that isn't necessarily going to open that philanthropy up to big box sort of Anglo-Western philanthropy, but should be celebrated for what it is. Is that a proper read or not quite?
I think to a great extent it is. We need to remember that with any donor, especially as our donor intelligence has improved over time, people are much more aware of asking the right questions. One of the perennial and universal questions is, how does that affect me? Mm-hmm. And, of course, with some of the biases.
When you say that, you mean the mission, maybe the mission of the charity. How's that affecting
or
me
what
as the
they
donor?
do.
Right.
How does that help me? Mm-hmm. And that, of course, is an age-old question. But as more and more, let's just say Arab Americans have become part of the, let's say second generation, for example, mm-hmm. part of the traditional American culture without losing their own roots, this, I believe, is a factor that how much have we been included? How does this library project affect me if I can't find a section in Arabic? So should I give to this library renovation? Instead, my mosque has perhaps a collection of materials. The same can be said about a lot of religions, like I live right near a Buddhist temple. And how does giving to that versus giving to the local community center when the Buddhist temple is already having programs that affect us? I think that's part of the element that we need to remember. And harking way back to when you and I just started, I said it's a matter of inclusivity. Not opportunism, but inclusivity. People like to be part of a winning cause, but at the same time, how does it affect me?
And is that, I gather that's universal. I see that in your book throughout, but I guess what I'm asking is part of that even stronger in the Arab American community? Is it purposefully meant to have that be a more insular philanthropy, I guess, than necessarily an integrated philanthropy?
Part of that, I think I could answer by saying, when I first started working on this topic more than 2 decades ago with workshops, research, speaking on it, all those aspects, I could hardly find anything on Arab American or Arab roots of giving, and yet we know how strong they are.
Right.
A former grad student of mine who works in Turkey. Turkey is always up for grabs. What continent does it belong to? But let's just look at the Muslim aspect. They had foundations that were giving way back in the Sultan's days. So looking at some of those traditions.
So it's clearly part of the culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think partly it's because the research and the knowledge about Arab American giving, and then put together some of the cataclysmic events we've had, some of that has inhibited our full understanding, but also reaching out to the populations that make up that broad group. Moving
on to Jewish philanthropy, which I think, in many ways, maybe we know more about that because of an integration of cultures, but may mirror, it seems to me, what's happening in the Arab philanthropy culture, in that Jewish philanthropy can be very insular, but can also be integrated.
Just one point going back, when we look at Islam and some of the tenets, they probably have some of the strongest, because religion has been a big part of this.
Sure.
mandates for giving.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we move to the Jewish populations, you have the Jewish by culture or birth or by faith or both, and they also have some very strong mandates for giving, whereas let's take some of the Protestant religions, it's not as strong a mandate, it's more of a please do or a suggestion. So I think that also has developed some, if I could loosely use the word, insularity in both the Arab and the Jewish cultures, those strong traditions of faith, whether they adhere to them strongly or not, they're there. Mm-hmm. And also giving Jewish populations that are now much more, especially younger, donors are giving across borders. Mm-hmm. We used to have the United Jewish Appeal, very strongly for Jewish causes. Now it's spreading out. And I suspect the more we research the Arab world, we'll see the same thing.
That's what I thought, is that we may not know as much about it, but it probably does look very similar. I think, interesting to the Jewish culture is this sort of hierarchy of philanthropy. Very, a lot of thought obviously has been given into this, that sort of the lowest moral value of giving would be one who gives unwillingly. The highest value or moral value to giving, the highest form of charity, is to strengthen the hand of the person in need by giving a loan or by joining him or her in partnership or offering training so that person in need may become self-sufficient in overcoming poverty. So, teach a man to fish, sort of seen as the highest form of philanthropy. So that's obviously a very well thought out cultural approach to philanthropy, when you have step-by-step approaches as to what is the best type of. So Jewish philanthropy, the note that I made to myself, and I'll just, again, I'm watching the time here, the note that I made to myself coming away from your chapter is that Jewish philanthropy is very serious business.
It dates back to biblical times. And while much of the world believes in God or a God, that was possibly the closest. The closest,
right. Moving on to European philanthropy, this is I think from a Western tradition, is where philanthropy found its roots into America. How much of American philanthropy finds its roots in European philanthropy, and how different is European philanthropy?
Well, if we go back to the first settlers of America, or the first pilgrims, or the pioneers, or whomever, they were mostly from Europe and brought those traditions with them. Now, what we do find is very interesting is what the Soviet Union, the changes in the political atmosphere in Europe. Let's just take my country of Estonia. Pre-war, World War II, it was really not part of the culture to give to a stranger. Estonians are very independent and self-motivated. And then the Soviet period of about 50 years changed the dynamic. And then post-Soviet times, and I was very fortunate to be funded to go over there in the early years of freedom to help them develop some of the nonprofit concepts as well as organizations. And the idea, okay, we need to work together to build up the country. We don't want government interference. Mm-hmm. Remember what it meant. And I think
so. You don't want to give away the independence of philanthropy by making it a government relation.
And so when it came to America, remember why many people came to America? Some of those same attitudes came with them. We're self-reliant, but we've got to work together to build up this new world, this new society.
Well, let's kind of marry into, because I think what you're saying here, and certainly your book makes the case that European philanthropy and American philanthropy are very tied to each other. One of the topics that I took away is certainly Alexa de Tocqueville's work on associations, and that's sort of the roots of American philanthropy. Of course, that was written in 1831. And you say in your book, associations first formed spontaneously by people with similar interests and goals who began to be established by public policy. Associations became legal entities and proliferated greatly until the middle of the 19th century. There was considerable concern that the individual would be subsumed into the faceless class of people For example, the unemployed, the hungry, and the homeless. So did the movement towards association counter the desire to be an individual?
I don't think so. I think inherently, regardless of our personality type, whether it's introversion or extroversion, we need a context of people. Some need it more than others. Mm-hmm. And I think it was natural outgrowth of having to work together, whether in a village, whether as a pioneer troop going out west, this matter of, okay, I'm still an individual, which I will have to say North America has been very good at fostering that, and I speak as an immigrant and refugee. At the same time, realizing the need to work together for certain goals, the least of which I said that wrong, survival was probably one of the most important ones. The idea of working together, coming together, like-minded people. And we didn't
so it forced us to work together. Again, be mindful of time. I'm just very curious, because there are a couple of concepts that I still want to cover here. How did America become, arguably, the strongest philanthropic culture on the planet?
Well, I think that's a matter of perspective.
I'm talking just in sheer dollars. So whether or not you agree with how it's being managed in sheer dollars, more money is given in the United States than anywhere else on the planet. How did America get to that? And it seems sustainable over certainly 50 years of Giving USA report.
Well, I think there are two factors, and one of them builds into what my book talks about. One is that America has stood for freedom. America is great, and it does stand for freedom that sometimes we don't always appreciate or recognize unless we have the perspective of other cultures and countries. So I think the freedom to give where we want to. But I think the other thing, this is almost going full circle to what we're talking about, is the richness of the cultures. We don't always record everything with the IRS standards,
right.
And when we put that into the mix,
the
giving society, that the freedom that America stands for, and I get pretty impassioned about that because I am grateful to be in America. I'm very Estonian too, and I grew up with.
But isn't that statement right there, the richness of the American philanthropic experience, is that it's actually an immigrant philanthropic experience that comes together from all these cultures that you've spoken of, come together in America and only become richer when they're here together. Now, the reason that I was rushing along, we only have 7 minutes left, is because I did not want to miss sort of what almost feels like the capstone to the book, and one of the, I think, the most important reasons to own and have this book, and that is what you call the culturally proficient professional and nonprofits. And it's brilliant, and people need to read this. Please share with my listeners what is that concept which I think is so important.
I think first of all we need to consider that culture is to a group as personality is to a person. There are some tangible evidences, and then there are the intangible. And we, as nonprofit leaders and fundraisers, we're the ones that need to create, first of all, an awareness, then an interest in what are these differences, moving all the way up to proficiency. This involves a lot of what we do, how we speak. I was working with a colleague in another country, and it was in English, and it was being translated, and she said, well, whatever floats your boat. And it was so amusing, because she was the one speaking, and it was so amusing to watch the puzzle look on the faces of the people. So that's point number one, is our language used. Don't give me a ballpark figure. The people don't relate to that. Right. One is understanding even the matter of time. Mm-hmm. When I worked in Thailand, people are accustomed to silences. In the American overall culture, we don't tolerate silences. Another factor is our body language, even the distance between people. A lot of this is fun because you learn to maneuver in your particular comfort zone, but also moving out of that comfort zone. Here's a cliche, think outside the box. It keeps us from having stagnant minds, frankly. But understanding what are some of those, and then, of course, going to the top level, which is what the book is about, understanding maybe the tip of the iceberg. What do we notice?
What's
and
a
then
place to
digging, then digging deeper to how do we, without losing who we are. You know, Alexander Pope said, know thyself to thine own self be true. Well, if he lived today, he probably would have added a few phrases to that and said, while remaining true to yourself, add these layers that give you not just proficiency, but it's interesting, it's exciting to understand those differences, especially when it comes to common good.
Well, the world is an exciting place, and when you don't close yourself off to the richness of the cultures around the world, you become richer. So in the final moments that we have, one of the concepts that you brought up is one that is growing to be near and dear to CAF America's heart, and that is the notion of diaspora giving. And you say money sent to the country of origin or back home is a significant portion of generosity practiced by immigrant groups, which is what we were talking about, as has been discussed previously in this book. It is actually the second largest flow of funds to developing countries, only exceeded by international aid. That is significant, and I'm just in a couple of moments going to share. So the Rockefeller Foundation funded an initiative at the Aspen Institute to start what became known as the Diaspora Investment Alliance. And the whole focus there was to create an online platform for various diaspora groups where they could give in a tax-effective way back to their homeland to pre-vetted charities and projects that they could know would make a difference in their homeland. When the Aspen Institute had fully developed that program, they looked around for where could that be housed and where could that appropriately be administered, and they chose CAF America. So CAF America is now the home of the Diaspora Investment Alliance. This happened just a few months ago, so we're working on all the details, and we expect over the summer and in the fall various diaspora investment platforms will be launched, and we think that it will most likely start where the energy is greatest right now, as possibly Bangladesh, Kenya, Philippines, India are some of the countries that we're in diaspora groups that we're working with right now, and of course it can go as broadly as possible. 3 minutes left. Diaspora giving and understanding cultures and philanthropy seems to tie all of this together. This is your closing statement. 3 minutes. Take us out to the end.
If I can have half a minute, let's not forget Native Americans.
Right.
And one of the terms, for example, Indian giver, which we see as derogatory, was actually lauding the generosity that was quite common among all the different tribes. We forget how many tribes there were. And the factors of Native American giving, I think we can't overlook that, because their generosity even to those Europeans who came over. Well, one thing I would like to call attention to is that with the help of a webmaster and many other people, I have a website. Actually, the title of the book, Diversity and Philanthropy. And here, other people, including yourself, now you're on air with that promise, are going to write columns. And I also, on every so many weeks, I'm going to have references. For example, AFP has a wonderful piece on diversity and inclusivity. I'm going to be referencing those on the website. So this is a matter of continuing the topic, because it's never finished. Our world changes, type of people who come over, giving from the cultures they bring over, and so it's a never-ending topic. So I feel like my work is just the next step to further understanding and practice.
Absolutely. Brilliant book, Diversity and Philanthropy, Expanding the Circle of Giving by Dr. Lilya Wagner. Don't forget, next week here on the Nonprofit Coach, we will be live Tuesday, 12 noon Eastern. Dr. Wagner, Lilya, thank you so much for being my guest, and thank you for coming in and giving me the opportunity to have you right here in the studio with me.
And thank you for having me. You can tell I'm passionate about the topic.
Absolutely, and a terrific book. Go out and get it. You can find it on Amazon.
Remember, You've been listening to the Nonprofit Coach Radio Show with Ted Hart. Tell all your friends to check out our production schedule and download our iPod and iPad-friendly podcast at tedhart.com. Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Coach.
When it comes to cleaning your house, who doesn't wish un galán with a trust fund swept in and passed the mop to your evil stepmom like in the telenovelas? Hola, it's Chiquis here, and although life isn't always like in the soap operas, Fabuloso does bring a clean that's always over the top. Get your home dramatically clean anytime you like, without any evil mama drama. Just long-lasting lavender freshness. That's Fabuloso, taking the drama out of any mess.
Fabuloso's 2 times concentrated formula provides 2 times more active ingredients versus non-concentrated Fabuloso Original. Use as directed.